Well, I'm looking down at the book of Ecclesiastes because I've taught the book before, but it's been a while since I've revisited it. and I think we're just going to plow forward for a little while. I think we'll get Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon done. And we'll finish up the poetical books going verse by verse each morning. Now, so that said, as many of you well know, I don't prepare for these messages. I just have my notes in my Bible that I've used over the years teaching through the Bible. And so I'm kind of just quickly looking through here. It's the words of the preacher, right? And it's the idea, it's Solomon. And the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So, I mean, it kind of narrows that down, right? Who this preacher is, this person declaring it. Now, we're going to find that the word vanity, Pastor Chuck Smith used to call it that which vanishes. He's right there on my shelf. So that which vanishes. I mean, vanity, it was all for nothing. That's kind of a way to think of this word vanity. It shows up 29 times, or maybe it's in 29 verses. I forget. I have a note. It either shows up 29 times or 29 verses. It might actually, I think it's actually, no, it's in 29 verses is what I have written down here. So it's 29 verses, but you find it 5 times in verse 2 alone. And so that's going to be a big part of this study in Ecclesiastes. It's all for nothing. It was all for nothing. Another thing that is a very large theme that maybe people overlook is 27 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, we find the phrase under the sun. Under the sun. And so this is a book I actually thoroughly enjoyed when we went through it as a church, because once again, I feel like when we study something deeper, we can have a deeper appreciation for it because we understand it better. It's hard to really appreciate something you don't understand. And dare I say, I'm not afraid to say that I find the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel hard to understand unless I study them, unless I take the time to dig deeper. In my daily reading, now we all know there are some amazing chapters and sections and verses in those books, right? Obviously, there are some Isaiah 53 and all these other things, but the deity or just the everlasting character of God and all these, there's no other God. Anyway, but I think we all will agree, at least you people who watch my show, other people, show. Anyway, but you guys understand that some of those books are hard, but when we study and understand, oh, that's the context. That's what Jeremiah is talking about. That's what was going on, which led, then they start to make better sense. And so I'm kind of just introducing the book of Ecclesiastes today. And maybe I'll see if we get to a text, but we already said it's Solomon. Now here's the part where I will differ from other teachers you might read or listen to, is that I believe that at the end of his life, Solomon turned back to the Lord. And I believe that Ecclesiastes was written at the end of his life. Here's the big thing, is that if you take the book of Ecclesiastes, it can be difficult to interpret now, but there's a secret now, okay? Because sometimes you read stuff and you could make assumptions, but with just a little bit of extra information, you would be examining what you're looking at with a different mindset, and then you would catch on. Let us say you're reading a murder mystery book or some kind of a mystery book. Now, obviously, like most mysteries, Sherlock Holmes, right? As the story would go through, you're wondering who did it. And you're reading your book and you're trying to figure out who did it. And then at the end of the book, wow, it's a big surprise. And you find out who the person was. But what if you flipped to the end of the book, went and looked to see who it was, right? So now you know who the bad guy is. And then you read the whole book already knowing who the bad guy was. Do you think you might be examining things a little differently, right? You could even tell me, feel free to comment like, haha, I get it, right? I mean, as you go through, you're going to understand, okay, this makes more sense. He's doing. I see what he's doing. And so the idea is when you know the end, then as you go through it, it'll help you interpret the things you're seeing and reading. So let's do just that. Let's flip to the end of the book of Ecclesiastes. 12 chapters, right? Yes, 12 chapters. Verse 13, Ecclesiastes 12:13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Now, if that's not a great introduction to a conclusion, I don't know what is. Here, Solomon is going to tell us the conclusion to the whole matter. This whole book, he says, I can summarize this whole book for you if you'd like, right here. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Now, you tell me, what kind of a Solomon does that sound like? Exactly, right? I mean, that's the point, is that this is not a pagan Solomon. This is not a Solomon who is chasing after women and booze and who knows what, monkeys, gold-plated ivory. Solomon had some crazy stuff. But the point is that this is a Solomon who has done all those things. And he can now go back and tell you what the conclusion of the matter is. Because of Solomon, we don't need to chase after sex, drugs, and rock and roll. He already did it. And he did it more than you ever could. It's hard to enumerate, sin, and maybe it's probably not even worthwhile. But let's just think of it this way, that there are a lot of people in this world who chase after sex. And it's the sad and disgusting truth that people probably have pornography collections like my book collection. But pornography's not the same as the real deal. And I'm just going to go on a limb and say that the average person in this world, and this is not a good thing, but painting a picture for us, the average person has probably not had over 1,000 sexual partners. But Solomon did. That's the thing. Between his wives and concubines. So these aren't even one-night stands. These are people like readily available for him. They're his wives and his concubines. And so imagine that. If someone wanted to exhaust the possibilities of sex, Solomon did it. That's a subject that, at least in the Bible, we have information on. Why I pick that? It's because we know how many wives and concubines Solomon had. Now, and again, totaling up 1,000, right? So now, what about money? Well, the Bible says that he made silver as worthless as gravel, in the sense that there was just so much money in the kingdom. Because when there's a lot of money, inflation, right? If there's too many dollar bills introduced to the United States, the value of the dollar goes down. But this is like the opposite of that. He just made everything so prosperous that it's like everyone had so much that there was just all this to spare. And so you read about what the food was like at his table. Obviously, that many wives, he had a lot of kids. And when you read about all the wealth people brought him, and I brought up already, that Solomon had an ivory throne. So this is all made of ivory, and then it was gold-plated. Solomon, people have done the math. I actually don't have that math, but I've heard it before, that, by modern standards, Solomon still made Bill Gates and the IKEA guy and whoever else, Elon Musk, these richest people, he makes them pale in comparison. Dare I say, Solomon experienced more in sex, more in money, and with that power, and the idea of drunkenness and all this other stuff, seeking substance. I mean, the Bible doesn't go into great depths, but let's just assume, I'm going to assume, there were drugs back then. The biblical word for sorcery, when they list, there's all these like witchcraft, sorcery, but when it's specifically what we translate into sorcery, in the Greek language, it's pharmakia, and even the Hebrew word, which I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know that the Hebrew word also, they both relate back to drugs, pharmakia in Greek, where we get pharmacy from. So Solomon probably also experimented with whatever kind of drug was available. He probably did everything you could do. And that is actually one reason why I enjoy this book, because vanity of vanities, verse 2, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. G.K. Chesterton. I'm double guessing myself, second guessing myself. I can't say anything right, can I? Ooh. And I'm going to paraphrase because I've never memorized it word for word, and sometimes I like to paraphrase it better. But in short, it's from him that I hear this idea that the total and most absolute feeling of despair, the idea that there's nowhere to go, there's nothing you can do, absolute helplessness, it does not come from the weariness of pain, but from the weariness of pleasure. You see, if you are wearied by pain, there's always hope. Maybe it doesn't feel like there's always hope, but the idea is that it could get better. You could get healed. Things could work out. There's always that sliver of hope. But when you are wearied of pleasure, when you've tried to satisfy your lusts in every way possible, and you still feel empty, where can you go from there? There's nowhere to go. Weariness of pain, there's always that hope of things getting better. But weariness of pleasure, there's nowhere you can go. Solomon went there. He tried everything to the fullest so that you don't have to. Solomon is going to try everything under the sun. And again, that's our phrase, right? Vanity, 29 verses. Under the sun, 27 times. He's tried everything under the sun. Everything this earth had. Everything this world could offer. He went there. And what was the conclusion of the whole matter? Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is man's all. It's all that really matters. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. So, there's our introduction to the book of Ecclesiastes. I think Solomon has tried it all. And so as we read, I interpret everything in light of that. That is part of my hermeneutic. My method of interpreting this book is recognizing that Solomon's looking back on a life where he did it all. And so some of the verses and the wording, in fact, I think one of the longest rabbit trails of trying to interpret a confusing Hebrew phrase was in this book. And so I remember spending a lot of time trying to understand it until finally, after like that 18th commentary, I found one that makes sense. And so, but as we interpret what Solomon's saying, we're going to keep that in mind, because I think if we assume that Solomon is just totally in despair and he just is totally depressed, I think he's looking back at what caused him despair, what caused him depressed, but he did ultimately find the answer. And it was turning back to God with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his strength. And that made sense to Solomon. All right. You guys have a great day. I'll see you guys at 6:45 in the morning tomorrow, and we'll start into this book of Ecclesiastes. God bless you guys.